Rock Solid Radio wants to thank Maxwell Construction, who has been our sponsor since the very beginning. For over 30 years, Maxwell has delivered the highest quality projects by holding to their core values of customer satisfaction, positive attitude, respect, and excellence. So if you have any kind of commercial construction need, give Maxwell Construction a call today at 812-537-2200. Welcome to Rock Solid Radio. I'm Linda Hutchinson here with my husband, Merrill. How are you doing, honey?
I'm exhausted.
You're exhausted?
I'm tired.
From what?
I went to the Arnold Strongman competition over the weekend.
Well, you didn't compete.
Well, you didn't have to say that.
Well, I
mean, they didn't know.
Well,
I watched that. I sat there for hours and I watched it. I mean, that's an exhausting thing. You didn't have to tell everybody that I didn't compete.
Well,
I did watch it though.
Okay. Yeah. Well, sorry. I'm sorry that.
All right. So you put the light on me. Oh man.
Sorry, I kind of stole your thunder. And,
Well, this show
up.
didn't quite start the way I wanted it to. I kind of wanted things to go my way.
What did you want to do? Flex your muscles or something?
Well, I thought you were going to be like, well, how'd the competition go for you, honey, and all that. And I could kind of like play it up as if I actually did something. But
maybe if they're listening on a podcast and not a YouTube, maybe.
Wow. You see that, guys?
Okay.
What a lead in.
Okay, so hang on. That was wrong because we just talked about last week about laughter and about how we don't do it at the expense of each other. But we also said that we are recovering, that we, used to do that.
So now you're excusing yourself from me.
I'm not. I'm sorry. I apologize.
Well, so far this show started off real well. Anyway, that does lead us into today's show, actually. So things don't always go as you plan, do they? They don't always go as you plan. And so today, our titled show is When Storms Rock Your World. And so we are talking about this because on a regular basis at Rock Solid Families and the work that we do as coaches, we see people in the midst of storms, recovering from a storm, trying to prevent a storm. Storms are those things that set us off course, take us off the rails. And a lot of times it can devastate us, right? And so it could be something as simple as, well, my car didn't start this morning, or as drastic, as severe as maybe the loss of a child. But all of these things are things that we didn't want in our life, and they definitely altered our course of action. So we're going to talk about that today. And people oftentimes they question, like, this is when they're in the storm. They're like, well, if there was a God, and so we're going to just talk about like, well, what does all this mean and how do we get through it?
Honey, I've just got to stop here because, we definitely live in a first world with first world problems. I was teasing last week about my caffeine and my Dunkin' addiction.
How you doing on that, by the way?
I'm drinking my hot water.
Whoa.
So there you go. I drove by Dunkin' today and I was like, everything in me wanted to stop.
I almost bought you one the other day and I went, oh, no, that's right. You can't have those.
But again, so minute. We were just watching a news program the other night, and it was back-to-back stories about storms, and they weren't really storms. One of them was about the earthquakes in Turkey and Syria and just the devastation, earthquake after earthquake.
Natural disaster.
Thousands and thousands of people dying in rubble and just no water, no heat, no electric. It's just, I can't imagine. And then the story after that was about the war in Ukraine and about how people's cities are being just pummeled and they're literally living in, rubble as well. And they're refusing to leave. And I just think we are so blessed here. And it doesn't mean we're better than they. But I don't want to just dismiss that there are people in this world that are dealing with devastating storms, things that are rocking their world, like you said, not necessarily a storm per se with wind and waves, but a devastating blow to their life that we just want to lift up in prayer and just shout out to those that are doing relief work in those areas of devastation. And I just can't even imagine. So we joke around here, it is first world problems compared to a lot of third world countries and what they're dealing with. And so we just want to pray for those folks that are dealing with those kind of storms.
You say that, hon, and I couldn't agree with you more. But isn't it interesting in our first world problems how we are we lead the league in depression and suicide and drug use. And so maybe our prevention of storms really isn't preventing as many storms as we think, and so not to minimize or maximize. The idea here is there are storms everywhere, no matter what you do. So let's thank our sponsors, and then let's start to kind of break this down and see if we can help others. And we certainly do not have all the answers on this show. Nope. And, and we don't really want to, because that would put us in a position of way greater than we need to be.
Yeah, or we should be. So before we go any further, we want to thank our sponsors. We want to thank Casey's Outdoor Solutions and Maxwell Construction for their support of Rock Solid Radio, Rock Solid Families. Again, this is a faith-based coaching organization. If you're just tuning in for the first time and you don't know who we are outside of the greater Cincinnati, Ohio area, and we do Zoom coaching. We do in-person coaching in our office. And so if there's anything that we can help with as we talk about these storms and unpack it, and you're feeling like your world has been rocked, if we can help you, reach out to us at rocksolidfamilies.org.
All right, I'm going to take you off course a little bit. I'm going to throw you a little storm. Yeah. Over the weekend, you did a little speaking engagement. Tell me about that.
Yeah. So was invited to a women's conference in West Virginia, and just was a great group of ladies there. And so I just want to thank them if they're tuning in for the first time. Welcome to Rock Solid Radio. I just really enjoyed myself, and I'm so thankful for the invitation. So it was great. We were talking about joy, and we've been talking about joy here, and I've done a podcast or two about it, and we're talking about how when a storm tries to steal your joy today. So it was just a great weekend.
I feel really inferior now.
Why?
Here, you spent your weekend talking to ladies and lifting them up, and I went on my weekend and I watched guys lift stuff up.
Well, here's the blessing, and thank you, ladies, because I was supposed to be with you in that. So I actually had a better time, and we also
I don't know if you had a better time than Zach and I. We had a great time.
Well, we did kind of take a course through our son and daughter-in-law and got to see them and the grandbaby. So that was even a bonus too, which was nice.
Okay, so let's get rolling.
Yeah.
All right, and we're going to start right off the bat with some scripture, because it is the reminder of which we need to be kind of grounded in, and that is John 16:33. And this is Christ talking, and he says, I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world. Now, that's one of our reassurances that Christ gives us, okay? He doesn't say you won't have trouble, like I will take your trouble away from you and you're never going to see storms. He says, I can give you peace. There is a way that you can start to think about these things and to work through these things. And so he's asking us right there to basically give our heart to him and start to rest in him. Yeah. So that's kind of a little, we need to think about that right up front.
But I don't like this verse because it says, in this world, you will have trouble. So guess what? You're going to have some trouble. So it's a kind of a reality check that we live in a fallen world. We are not perfect, as you reminded me, and
as I reminded myself as I watched all these big, strong guys lift, and I was like, oh, that hurts my back when you lift like that.
As I sit here in this chair. But it is a reminder that this world is not our home, okay? There is a life everlasting, that there is a perfect life that we are promised if we are in Christ, but it is not here and it is not now. So in this world, you will have trouble, but you're right. He says, take heart. I have overcome the world.
Yeah. So, Hun, let's talk about maybe what we just called some myths. And I don't know that they're myths as much as just they kind of get discussion that goes down different rabbit trails and sometimes lead people astray. And the idea, like sometimes people finally come to their faith because they're in a rock bottom situation. They're in a storm of all storms. And they come into their faith with the idea of, I don't know what else to do. I mean, I'm at the end of my rope. And they're obviously doing that because they're searching for the life raft. They're trying to grab onto something. But they kind of oftentimes feel like once I grab hold of that life raft, I'll finally be safe. And they kind of oftentimes the misnomer or the myth is that once I become a Christian, finally these storms will go away. Yeah. Finally I'll have fewer and less problems. And I think that's, as we've been talking about even at the beginning of this, like, let's just put that myth down right now. Now, it doesn't mean you are not going to have a lot of storms much calmer than they may have been. And it also doesn't mean you're not going to be able to avoid a lot of storms. Okay. I mean, a lot of faith is about storm proofing.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but it doesn't guarantee from now on we have no more waves.
Yeah. Another myth or misconception is that us Christians have our head in the sand, that we're naive about the world's problems and that we're not taking life seriously. We're kind of living in this, glass bubble or this with rose-colored glasses on. And the reality is, the truth is that Christian organizations and Christians have kind of led the way in a lot of disaster relief, starting of hospitals, poverty, you name it. And Christ followers have kind of been on the front lines of that. So I believe they've kind of been even more in the reality of we see the problem and we want to help, right?
Yeah. And I know a lot of people avoid the Christian faith because, life has storms in it, but man, I have a lot of fun. I party, I go out and kind of do what I want to do. And man, if I become a Christian, I got to hang up the fun. And so I think that that's a myth. It's the perception of fun and the understanding of fun is kind of in the eye of the beholder and how you start to define it. It may be fun to go out drinking with your buddies, but how's that fun doing for you when you're sitting in jail because you just got your third DUI? Yeah. And so again, not that always happens. What I'm saying is there are in fact, we probably have more fun because of the freedom that comes in so many other ways from our faith. So the idea that, once you became Christian, all of the fun went out of your life, we just want to say not so true there.
Well, and if you've heard or listened to our podcast for very long, Merle and I met on spring break, a college spring break in Daytona Beach, Florida.
Yeah, I had my Bible out on the beach.
No, you did not.
What?
And neither did I.
What?
And it's been 39 years ago this month. 39 years ago, he and I met, mutual friends, and we kind of met over a case of beer. And, so we've lived on both sides of the track.
Now everybody knows. Great.
But the reality is that we can now have fun with fewer regrets. And we know that we have that peace and that joy that is not going to give us a hangover the next day or, break up our marriage next week. And so that's the reality and the truth. But the misconception is that Christians don't have fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And here's another myth. And when we said myths, not all of them are total myths. None of these are total myths, but they have discussion points in them. And that is these Christians, they're all nothing but a bunch of hypocrites. And I think, yes, that one is true.
Some of us, but some are.
We all have hypocrisy in our life. In other words, sin is when we basically turn away from God, and we are all sinners. We all have selfish natures. We all do things that we go, why did we do that? We treat people. We have bad thoughts. We are apathetic. We have sins of omission. When we saw something, we should have helped the lady across the street. So we can all be, if you look, well, you don't have to look very hard for me. You're going to find me on a hypocritical stance or something. And so, but here's the point. Look around. So is everyone else. No one is free from this. And some people just, because they hold the bar so low on themselves, they say, well, you really can't call me a hypocrite because I already admitted that I'm a loser. That's just, think about how cheap that is.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we're not giving anybody permission to go out and just do whatever they want because everybody's going to do it. Okay. Our goal is to align our words and our actions so that they are congruent and that they are congruent and aligned with God's word. I mean, that's our goal.
Right.
And I don't do it perfectly, and neither do you. I was just confessing to my mom's group recently that, it wasn't an hour after church recently that I blew it and lost my cool with our teenage son. And so I had to apologize to him. I had to kind of repent that was not the way to handle something. And so, it was a little oxymoron that it was right on church day, but that's the reality. And so, yes, we all have hypocrisy, as you said, when we don't do what we know we should do.
Yeah. And I think where we do get hypocritical is when we fail to look at our own and keep pointing the other people's out. And I think that's the thing, okay, why don't you just keep your eyes in the mirror and look at yourself in your own way so that you can work on your own challenges and hypocrisy.
Honey, I was just having lunch with a dear friend this week, and
but you're going to leave that with a deer. Are our deer are very friendly around here, but
and we were talking, and she said, I don't even know if I know what healthy is. And the reality is when you've lived in a life or family or grown up with just a lot of hypocrisy and a lot of incongruency of words and actions and attitude, it leaves you kind of confused as to what is healthy. And so one of the first things we do at Rock Solid Families and Rock Solid Radio is walk families, couples, individuals through a parable that Jesus tells us about how to build our home, how to live our life, how to build something that is going to be unshakable and healthy. And so we call it, and he calls it, the wise and foolish builders.
Yeah. And so, at the risk of talking about this parable too often, but it is the parable that we find ourselves naturally drifting to when people are coming into us. And just by the nature of the beast that you're talking about, these people have said, well, I thought I would do this, and I've done this for the last 10 years of my life, and I thought I was on course, and all of a sudden they're not on a course. And so you have to help people go, okay, well, what were you making those assumptions on? What were you building that on? And so the story of the wise and foolish builder, hun, even though it seems like we say it a lot, it's like, well, what are you grounding yourself on?
Yeah.
And so that is the foolish builder built on sand. And I think about the sand part because we've talked about that, being on the beach and building sand castles, how, and so quickly you can move sand around and you can mold it the way you want it, and in no time have something that looks kind of spectacular. And when you're working with rock, you got this guy with a chisel, and he's taking, hours and months and years to chisel something out. But once it's set, it is set.
Yeah. So Matthew 7:24-27, therefore everyone, this is Jesus's words, who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against the house, yet it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against the house, and it fell with a great crash. I was listening to the story about the Turkish homes and buildings, and there's a lot of very big investigations about the fact that there was so much faulty building, which they believe is one of the reasons why it's so devastating, that the buildings did not withhold this earthquake, and that they're going after these builders, and I'm thinking, where do you even begin in that? But this is a perfect example. You got to build with something strong and foundational for it to be able to stand an earthquake or a storm.
And why wouldn't they build with a solid foundation? And I could pretty much assume because we're cutting corners, we're saving costs,
it's cheaper. Yep.
We can move this along faster. And so these are the things that we're talking about. And let's talk a little bit about storms, and not to get too crazy in some sort of weather sort of discussion.
Are you going to do your science guy?
I want to go science-y.
Bill Nye the Science Guy.
Storms in nature, weather type storms, are actually nature's way of trying to work towards equilibrium. So you can have high energies, you hear about the high energy system and then the low energy system. And so there's so much of this dynamic or high energy motion going on. And by its nature is trying to seek a level of equilibrium. Okay. But because of the earth is moving, we have all of these energy pockets that build up and drop down. And so the high energy has to drop to the low energy. And it does that like a tornado is nothing more than a release of that energy. It collides, and we've got to get that high pocket of energy down to release. And that's why oftentimes once the tornado goes by, it feels very calm, right? Or you feel a difference in temperature. Usually it's cooler after it was a warm system coming through. And so the same thing here is because we have lots of energy going on. But when we talk about storms in our life, we are reminded of the limits. Storms remind us of our limits. Okay. And weather, we hit limits. You have this weather system can only get so high. This pressure can
I'm making
only
all
get
this
so
money.
high.
I'm making all this money.
Yeah,
I'm making all this
and
money.
you have limits, and we finally get to a point where we can't sustain it any longer. We can't sustain it. Okay. So when I can't sustain something any longer, I hit a limit. And when that limit comes, that's when the rains come. That's when the storm in your life comes. And so it reminds us of the limits that we have, which is so different. And this is why we have to understand our connection to God. God has no limits.
Right.
We use three different words to describe God. He is omnipotent, omniscient, and he's omnipresent. And so that omnipotent, that all-powerful, in other words, no limits to his power.
Yeah.
He's omniscient. He's all-knowing. You can't stump him with a math problem.
Yeah.
Okay? And he's all present. So like he literally can be here in China at the same time. And so our physical body can't even do those things. I can't be in two places at one time. All right. So right off the bat, these storms remind us that we are limited. We have limits. And so every day is a test of our limits. We measure limits all the time. I wear a watch. That tells me my time limits, okay? I go to the weight room and I have a limit on the weight I can lift. The food that I eat, there's a limit on it. And God has no limits, okay?
Yeah.
And so it's important for us to start to understand like, oh, wow. So what happens when I hit my limit?
Yeah. And I love that word that you use, that equilibrium. And because that equilibrium is really what God is trying to create in this life of ours. And yes, it's not heaven, but he's trying to, help us to experience a little bit of piece of heaven here on earth with peace and joy and love and cooperation. And but sometimes when we are out of balance, when we have gone to our limit, there is going to be a storm, whether it be we drank too much or we spent too much or we lied too much or whatever that is. Like we hit our limit and God has to bring us back into an equilibrium. And sometimes that's painful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's get into some actual okay, well, here's how our faith and here's what we can do. Here are some things that we can do to help prepare for storms, but also to deal with storms if you find yourself in the middle, okay, of that storm.
Recently we had a tornado warning and we were literally in our office and we were in session and our daughter texted tornado ?
I don't know, go out and check.
And I was like, and I could hear the sirens, and I looked on my phone, it said just tornado watch. And so I text back and I said, just a tornado watch, honey, you're okay. And she texts back, she went, taking shelter. I was like, oh, but see, they were okay because they had prepared for what happens when there's a tornado warning. When there's a storm, what do we do? And so we have got to do that as well. We've got to be in preparation.
Yeah. So that number one point that we're talking about is prepare.
Yep.
And so some of the keys, hon, that when you say to somebody, well, you need to prepare for the storms. Well, there's the storms of weather, but here are some of the main protections in terms of preparation that you want to be putting the work in now before the actual storm comes. How about this? How's your home? Not just the physical structure of the home, but the atmosphere of your home. Is it a place that you're okay to be in, or is it a place that you hide from and you stay away from because it's so turbulent? There's already a storm in my house. Yeah. So how about let's make sure that we prep and prepare our house well, not for the weather storm. That's an assumed thing that we do, but just for the calmness.
So here's another one, and that's a church community. I hear people all the time say, I could just watch online, or I don't need church, or I don't need God. Well, that sounds great when everything is going well, but what happens when your spouse is diagnosed with cancer or your house burns down? It's amazing working in the church for decades. It was amazing what brought people to the church. It was usually a storm.
Yeah, yeah. Well, hon, we're in rock solid families. And one of your biggest storm-proofing systems that you have available is your marriage and your family.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the one. The church and all those things are great. But if you don't have the marriage and the family strong from the get-go, All of these, what could be, it's nothing more than a stiff wind blowing by. It could be enough to blow you over if your own family, your own marriage is that weak. And so making sure that these things, and that's why we talk about the importance of establishing the strong values in the family and maintaining the marriage, because that is going to be your first go-to source outside of your faith of God.
So if you were at the conference, women's conference in West Virginia this past weekend, you heard me talk about who's in your yard. You've got to surround yourself with healthy people in your yard that have aligned the same vision and mission of yours. So whether it be mentors, whether it be preachers or priests, whether it be support groups, whether it be a counselor, a therapist, like a coach, you've got to have those people, family and friends, obviously, if they're healthy, we want them in our yard, but friends, you've got to have a base, a life group, a community group, something that is there when you need it.
Right. Okay, so let's talk about, if the storm does hit, where is your immediate support? Okay, where do you actually get the old first aid or the medical service, so to speak? Okay, and that's where we talk about the storms of life. Do I have a church that I go to? Do I have a preacher I go to? Do I have a priest? Do I have support groups, my friends, and those kinds of things, my family? Counseling centers, oftentimes people call us and the marriage is blowing apart, and we say, how did you hear about us? And they say, well, we Googled you, or a friend told us about you. It would be helpful to know that if you think you're susceptible to certain types of things, you might want to get some of those connections beforehand so that you can where to go without being panicked. Yeah.
And part of the preparation is to make sure you have the resources, whether it be that you're saving money instead of just blowing it all, whether it be you have income coming in and a job, some kind of retirement plan, insurance policy for when that storm literally does hit your home, an emergency fund. We love Dave Ramsey around here. And so the Dave Ramsey emergency fund is huge about, storms are going to hit. He tells us all the time. The car is going to break down. And so what are you doing to prepare?
Yeah. Okay. Number 2, our next area of advice is to pray. And the prayer thing kind of goes back to the idea of our limits that we run into during storms and God's unlimitless power, okay? The idea that he covers all. And so sometimes we think that when we're in the storm, we feel like God just left us, like he's abandoned us. And that is not true at all. The challenge is, are we looking for him? Do we know where to look? Are we in touch with him? And so prayer is how we show that we're in relationship with God. It's how we talk about all the time the importance of the 10-minute check-in every day with couples. And so if you only go to God in the midst of the storm, honey, goes down Matthew 7:21 and 23 or through 23, says, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name drive out demons, and in your name perform many miracles? Then I will tell them plainly, I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers.
Ouch.
If you just show up during the storm and you try to say, well, I was good. Don't you remember that one time I was good? God wants a relationship with us. He wants our heart through and through. He wants us to be tapped in like an umbilical cord to him at all times. And so if we are only using him, he's not much for that. He's pretty much a jealous God. And he doesn't appreciate you sitting on his throne.
So let's say you are praying and you're asking God to bring relief, or maybe to take the cancer away, or to find you a job, or to bring your husband back, or whatever that is, and you're not getting the answer when you want it, how you want it, then we got to remember God is hearing you. God does see your need. He hears your cries. And so he is going to answer you. That answer may be, yes, I want to bless you. I want to answer you the way you have asked. Okay. That answer may be yes. The answer may be no. And if it is a no, then that means he has got something better for you. You may not think it's better, but it's going to be better in the long run for you and everyone around you. So there's a bigger plan why he's saying no. Or here's my favorite one, not yet. I've seen God
I don't
work.
like that one.
Actually, you're right. It's the hardest one. But I have seen God work, not in my timing, not in my way, but man, when I can look back and see, wow, I'm glad he didn't give me what I originally asked for. But what he did give me was so much better. And it's a not yet, then I got to trust him. And that's where the prayer comes in.
Yeah. And with that prayer, even though the storm may not go away immediately, it starts to provide the peace and the understanding and peace. So we've talked many times about the brain can't work in an emotionally fired up state and a logical state at the same time. And so when you're in a storm, it sure does a whole lot better if I can calm myself down and allow my logical reasoning side so that I can have peace, so I can have more understanding of what is actually going on. And then I can actually see the directions that are starting to lay out in front of me of the possibilities for solutions. So God is because he's not limited, we can tap into him and know, I don't understand this storm right now, but I do know that he's promised me to hold me. He's promised to take care of me. Yeah. And so I'm going to rest in that right now and let my heart rate come down, my blood pressure ease, and allow myself to start to think again.
Yeah. So we've got preparing, we've got praying, and then the third one is persevering. In Romans 5:3-5, it says, we rejoice in our sufferings, knowing that suffering produces perseverance, and perseverance produces character, and character produces hope. And hope does not put us to shame because God's love has been poured out into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us. And so I love that. And it's just a reminder that we have got to persevere in the trial.
Yeah. I mean, perseverance is that thing that so often these days, as soon as we're in our out of our comfort zone, we're ready to throw up our hands and quit. But it is when we are in that discomfort, that is when we start to see, where are my limits? Why am I limited in that way? If I continue to stay in the job that I've been in forever because I'm afraid of the risk of going out and starting a new job. And so at that point, my limit is my fear. And so that's one of those examples where I'm like, oh my gosh, how many more years? This is one of these gnawing storms that goes on like a drought in your life. And it's like, hey, you know what? Hand this over to God. Hand this over and allow yourself to persevere and know that you can trust that it may not be pretty. You may step out of your job and things start to get really shaky, but that's your fear and give your fear over to God.
Love that. So I want to add one more P.
You can't do that. I didn't have it written in here.
And that is praise. Because when God gives us what we need, not necessarily what we wanted, but what we need, and maybe not in our timing, but when he feels it's right, and we get to the other side of that storm and we can see the rainbow a lot of times after the rain, we have got to acknowledge his power and his presence and give him the praise. I tell my clients all the time, if we don't, we're going to miss his blessings in the future. I've seen this over and over again. When we point our eyes to Christ and give God the glory that he only deserves, not us, like, oh, did you see how I handled that? Did you see how I got through that? Did you see how I persevered? Man, if we don't give him the glory, when we give him the glory he deserves, we please him. When we deny his power and refuse to give him the glory when he ultimately is the source, we grieve him. And I believe he doesn't want to do it again if you're not going to give him the credit. If you give him the credit, I believe he's going to continue to be faithful and show you over and over again, I do hear you, I do see you, I am working, but that's only when we are obedient and give him the credit.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you put that in. That's good.
Yeah. P for praise.
Well, it's the gratitude, right? It's that gratitude. So, all right. So, as we've said at the beginning of the show, we are going to have storms in our life. So, I think the less time we spend worrying about what's possible storm could be coming next, let's just know that we can rest assured to know that there are going to be storms coming, but we are going to be able to persevere and get through them, especially when we latch on to that life raft of God, of knowing that Jesus Christ has got us. And I think there's that understanding of, like you said, well, maybe it doesn't turn out exactly like I want it right now. And so remember that omnipresent and that omniscientness is that it's forever. It's for always. It's for eternal.
Right.
The idea that you have eternal life.
Yeah.
Well, that's not with limit.
And it's not about you. So maybe the no is because he's looking at a family member or a friend or a coworker that this is going to bless and work out for them too. And that you're going to see why you didn't get the job, why that didn't happen. And so I want you to think the bigger picture that God sees and allow him and trust in him to do what he does best. And that means that we're going to trust and rest in him.
Yeah. All right. So as we close out, I want you to think about the storms you currently may be in or the storms that you have gone through or potentially see coming. And, some of the things you do really well. Okay. So you don't need to beat yourself up. Some things you're naturally, you've got a good church family. Your family is solid. Okay. So you're doing a lot of these things. But spend some time to think about what you do well and keep that in place and keep honing that and polishing that. But think about, this is an area that I need to get better on. Okay. And it might just be talking and praying to God more. It might be just handing over your baggage and your limits, handing those limits over to God and saying, it's up to you, God. So our challenge is for you to just do that, like to have that internal dialogue to say, man, these are some ways I want to get stronger so that I can endure the storms that I know will be coming my way at some time.
And I would say one of those biggest ways is to make sure you have people in your yard. Surround yourself with people because you are going to need people, even though we sometimes think we could do everything on our own. So please position yourself with a community of people who are going to be able to help you in a storm and you can help them in a storm.
All right. As we close out, we want to encourage you guys to get through those storms. Don't throw up your hands and quit. Perseverance is because we are trying to develop a relationship with God, and so it's our practice in that. But we want to thank you guys, and if we can help you through some of those storms, reach out to us. You can go to our website at rocksolidfamilies.org, or you can call our office at 812-576-7625. And so check us out, give us a call, see what we can do to help you out. Okay. Yeah. We also need your help. All right. And so one of the storms is that we keep having people come in and it's hard to deal with storms all the time. So we need your support. We ask for your prayers. We ask for your encouragement. And so anything that you can do to support our work and our ministry, we would greatly appreciate that.
Yeah. So thank you so much for listening to Rock Solid Radio, building a stronger community, one family at a time. Make it a great day.
Rock Solid Radio wants to thank Casey's Outdoor Solutions. Casey's is a premier garden center and gift shop located in Lawrenceburg, Indiana. They offer a wide selection of high-quality plants, landscaping materials, and home decor. They do amazing high-quality work and can help you transform your indoor and outdoor living spaces into something beautiful. So stop by Casey's Outdoor Solutions today and let them know you appreciate their support for Rock Solid Radio. Visit Casey's today at 21481 State Line Road, Lawrenceburg, Indiana.